Imagine building a billion-dollar company, only to wake up one day and find out you own nothing. Sounds crazy, right? Well, that's exactly what happened to some of the most famous startup founders. Have you heard of Eduardo Severin, Noah Glass, and Martin Eberhard? Even if you have heard one of them, probably not all three, right? These three people were the co-founders respectively of Facebook, Twitter, and Tesla. They got diluted out of their own companies eventually. And today we are diving into how this happens, what anti-dilution clauses are, and most importantly, how you as a lawyer can help protect your investors from dilution. A bit of trivia, Noah Glass still has an account on Twitter which says, "I started this." Alright, let's break it down. Dilution happens when a company issues new shares, reducing the ownership percentage of existing shareholders. This is pretty normal in the history of a company. When a company wants to raise more money to expand faster, build a new product, buy some other company, it will ask investors to invest in the company, and in return of their investment, it will issue new shares to the incoming investors. In startup terminology, this process is called raising funding rounds. It starts with the pre-seed and seed rounds, that is, when the company is as small as a metaphorical seed and it grows and becomes bigger later. After that, the growth capital is invested into the business to grow it, which is done in a series of rounds, which is called the Series A round. After that, it's the Series B, C, and so on. These rounds are raised from venture capitalists or private equity investors. Eventually, the company goes for an initial public offering and provides an exit opportunity to all its earlier investors. This is how typically funding is raised in any company. Now let's take an example. If a company was valued at 100 crore earlier and has grown significantly since then with better revenue and profits, will the next round of funding for the company happen again at 100 crore only? Definitely not. Let's assume it happens at a higher valuation of 125 crore. The company will raise money from an investor, let's say 25 crore, and the company will give them shares in return. These shares are also going to be worth their investment, which is 25 crore. Earlier, in the company's initial stages, there were 4 shareholders having 25% of the company when it was valued at 100 crore. So 25% of 100 crore, each shareholder had shares around 25 crore each. Now, when a new investor also puts in 25 crore of their capital at a valuation of 125 crore, they are bound to get 25 divided by 125, that is 20% of the company. However, has the value of the investment of the previous investors reduced? No, because now there are 5 shareholders each with 20% of the company. However, since the company itself has grown, the value of that 20% has become 25 crore. So there is no change in the value of individual shareholding of the earlier investors. Now let's take another example. A company has raised one round of investment at 100 crore valuation, and then it faced business difficulties and the business has suffered. Now, as a result of that, the valuation of the business has become 80 crore because of the difficulties the business faced. Now the company is short on funds and needs to raise money. Will a new investor in the company enter at the same valuation as it had before, a valuation of 100 crore? No, right? Because the business has become worse off. So, the business will agree that its value has reduced and it will raise money at a cheaper valuation. This is called a down round, something which is frowned upon by many investors, unless obviously there are extraordinary circumstances like COVID in which all businesses suffered. In a second case, when the company is facing a down round, the valuation has gone down from 100 to 80. If the company wants to raise an amount of again 25 crore, the company will have to give up 31% of its shares and the remaining 69% will get divided equally among the 4 previous investors. This causes a reduction in the value of their investment from the earlier level of 25 crore to merely 13.8 crore. As a result of this reduction, their shareholding is diluted. Moreover, a lot of times, dilution is also used as a power move to push out unwanted investors or founders because of some fights. And that is where anti-dilution clauses come in and can help the person being pushed out. So in both these situations where the shareholding of an investor can get diluted and the value of their investment reduced, anti-dilution clauses help. Okay, now let's come to an example. Let's take the example of Eduardo Severin, the forgotten Facebook co-founder, to understand this concept. Severin was Mark Zuckerberg's college buddy and the original CFO. Initially, he held a 34% stake in Facebook. But when Facebook started raising venture capital, things got messy. In the movie, The Social Network, which was based on Facebook's founding team and how they built Facebook from the ground up, things were shown a bit exaggeratedly. It was told that Eduardo Severin's holding was diluted from 34% to 0.03%.
And what was your ownership share diluted down to?
0.03%.
But in reality, it went down to about 10%. Severin was the CFO, so he undertook incorporation of the company in Florida as a limited liability corporation. This was not the best way to incorporate their company, as most startups in the US prefer going to a US jurisdiction called Delaware. Now, Delaware is highly sought after because of 2-3 main reasons. Number one, the dispute resolution in Delaware is incredibly fast. Second, there is ownership secrecy. And third, there are multiple tax benefits of having your company incorporated in Delaware. As a result of that, you will see Delaware jurisdiction's judgments also quite often as legal precedents in the US. Okay, coming back to how Zuckerberg did it. First, Zuckerberg knew that in the Florida Limited Liability Corporation, he couldn't have made any changes to the shareholding pattern because in the LLC format of a company, any new changes required make it mandatory for the founders to rewrite their agreement. So what he did, he incorporated a Delaware C Corp. One loophole in the company bylaws of Facebook was that it allowed Zuckerberg to become the sole director and issue as many shares as he wanted. And he used this loophole brilliantly. Now, once he had incorporated the Delaware C Corp, he bought the Florida Limited Liability Company through this Delaware corporation. And after that, he issued a huge number of shares claiming that he was issuing it for the employees. But in fact, he issued it to everyone else who was investing in further rounds of the company and also all the other co-founders, but just not Severin. And because everyone got new shares, Severin's stake got incredibly diluted. This was possible because Zuckerberg removed Severin as an employee and therefore he was not eligible for the employee stock options. He raised capital from Peter Thiel, the co-founder of PayPal, and thereafter Accel Ventures, which is a venture capital fund, also entered and invested in Facebook. Severin was accused of not doing his job, which we will come to a bit later, and before he knew it, from where we had discussed initially 34%, his shareholding dropped to around 10. Obviously, Severin sued and he reached a settlement with Zuckerberg and Facebook and he got some equity back, but definitely not as much as he once had. At the time of Facebook's IPO, Severin only held about 5% of Facebook, which still made him $5 billion from practically nothing that he did. Now, why didn't anti-dilution clauses save Severin? Because number one, he didn't have a board seat. Zuckerberg became the sole director and issued new shares. Number two, early stage founder agreements were not strong and they could not protect him from a dilution. And number 3, coming to the harsh reality, Severin had actually not performed his duties. He was running a separate startup on the opposite side of the country, and obviously that is a detrimental factor to his involvement in Facebook. So this was the tale of Eduardo Severin, how he was diluted out of the company and how Zuckerberg executed it. Finally, let's talk about Martin Eberhard as well, the guy who started Tesla. Eberhard was Tesla's first CEO, but Elon Musk became the biggest investor, and after a point, the board removed Eberhard. As Tesla raised more money, new shares were issued, and Eberhard's stake kept shrinking. He sued and ultimately settled, and Musk became the face of Tesla. Anti-dilution clauses could only protect him against down rounds. However, Elon Musk expanded the company and raised funds at a higher valuation. As a result of that, Eberhard could not do much. Now broadly, as a lawyer, there are 2 anti-dilution clauses which are present in agreements. The first is a full ratchet anti-dilution. Now this ratchet term comes from mechanical engineering, which is basically a device which moves in one direction only.
This basically means that the value of the investor's investment cannot go down, the value can only increase. In case new shares are being issued to further investors, the older investors would also have to be issued new shares to maintain the same value. And who would lose in this situation? It is the founders, unfortunately.
Coming to the second type of clause, that is the weighted average anti-dilution clause. When a company has a down round, 2 things are getting adjusted. The share price obviously reduces, and number 2, the number of shares have to be increased in the round, which reduces all the shareholders' individual ownership. The weighted average method takes into consideration the number of shares which are issued in this round, in comparison to the previous rounds which had happened. Therefore, if the company just wants to issue a small number of shares to get some money for the time being and bring the company back on track, it works better for everyone, because if the new issue is small in comparison to the original issue, the number of shares that have to be diluted become less and the founders are not harmed that much. Now, anti-dilution clauses typically in most agreements protect investors and not founders.
It's all about the bargaining power. More startups need investors than investors needing startups.
Lastly, as a law student in India, here is where you can make a difference while drafting these anti-dilution clauses. Number 1, you need to provide for founder vesting with acceleration. Now, vesting basically means the point at which the shares which were promised to you are actually transferred to your name so that you can sell or transfer these shares. You can provide for a clause which basically states that if a founder is forced out, they get their full equity immediately. Number 2, you can provide for a board seat protection. You should ensure that founders can't be voted out easily. Shareholding can be diluted, but a board seat can help a founder influence the company's decisions. In Facebook's case as well, Zuckerberg got the sole control of the board, and because of which he was able to issue multiple shares. If Severin had this board seat protection, he wouldn't have been harmed so much. And lastly, coming to a point which I had said we'll be discussing later, that you should define the roles of founders very clearly in the agreements. It would prevent not doing your job accusations like Severin faced. Zuckerberg accused Severin of not completing the 3 tasks which were assigned to him, and he used these tasks as a justification for diluting Severin's equity and firing him as an employee of Facebook. The 3 tasks were that he had to set up the company, he had to get funding, and he had to make a business model. He wasn't successful at doing any of the 3, and even when he did not get the best job done, because of which he was fired.
So in multiple cases like these, it was not a big deal because all of these people ended up becoming billionaires, so they eventually settled all their disputes and these issues did not become that huge. However, in any other corporate battle, these clauses are very crucial to the negotiations that are happening between investors and the company and between the founders themselves. So you have to be extremely careful when you are having these clauses negotiated in your contract.